At 10 minutes past the hour of 11 o'clock, right here in the studios of Freedom FM. Good morning and welcome to another edition of The People's Choice. Thank you for joining us as we continue our commitment to discussing the issues that matter most to the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. This morning, our focus is on the economy, how our nation's finances are managed, what fiscal responsibility means for everyday citizens, and the policies that influence growth, stability, and opportunities. Our guest is once again former Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, economist, and political leader of the People's Labour Party, Dr. the Honourable Timothy Harris. This morning we'll examine his approach to public finances, discuss government surpluses and deficits, the management of the citizenship by investment revenues, and his views on restoring fiscal discipline and strengthening confidence in the nation's economy. Dr. Harris, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, and good morning to all who are tuning to this radio program. Thank you for taking the time and paying attention as we consider serious developments at home here in St. Kitts and Nevis.
It's a pleasure to have you back with us this morning, and we know the time goes by very quickly, so let's get right into it. So, Dr. Harris, the previous weeks we spoke about your background, we spoke about your education. So, how did your background in accounting and finance shaped your approach to managing the country's money?
Thank you very much. I think there were important factors in terms of undergirding my own philosophy, in terms of public sector management, government finances, etc. But clearly they provide for me a strong background. My first degree at Kayville, as you noted, would have been a Bachelor of Science in Accounting. I achieved a first-class honors degree in that time, and went on to do a master's in St. Augustine, basically with a key emphasis on accounting. From there, given my very good performance, I was selected to be part of the UECEDA Professional Development Program, and in that regard to pursue a PhD in accounting. So my focus has always been largely on accounting, financing, government reporting, and issues of that nature. But I was also impacted by my own development, my own youthful days, growing up in a small, quiet community surrounded by poverty and learning the basics of financial management from my grandmother and mother and father. You have to cut your cloth accordingly. You have to learn to live within your means. And all those things then became clearer as I pursued higher learning. And you then begin to understand the importance of the numbers. That in a real sense, numbers reflect reality. We could think and we could say many things, but the numbers truly don't lie. It's like you're having your blood pressure check, and when they tell you it is 150 over some high figure, you know, well, I'm out of line. The numbers are speaking clearly, irrespective of how you might be feeling at that particular moment in time. So I would say I spent a lot of time preparing myself, acquiring wisdom, exposing myself to the literature, understanding the budget process, how it works. That is critical, because if the budget process is in turmoil, nothing becomes a reality. The budget just becomes all talk. So year after year you may hear about a smart hospital, but nothing happens because it is not embedded in the budget framework. It is not yet ready. These are some of the things then that brought the level of fiscal discipline I had when I assumed the Ministry of Finance. And for the record, I come to the office of the Prime Minister in 2015 with experience in the budgeting system, because for 2008 and 2009, I was a Minister of Finance under the former regime. And one of the things best known was that in the years in which I assumed leadership of that particular ministry, for the first time in over a decade, the country had surplus. A surplus in 2008, a surplus in 2010. So we were able to do some transformation very early, going back again to the learning that it is important that we balance the books. It's important that the budget reflect the reality of what we can do. And so, in a real sense, I would say my professional training provide me with the wherewithal, the discipline, my own independent engagement, reading every publication from the World Bank, the CDB, the ECCB, help me to understand. So when you see numbers, you can probe them. You know how they are computed. You can ask the why questions of your financial secretary, of the representative of the IMF and the World Bank, so that you are better informed to take policy action. So, in summary then, the learning and the life experiences, both in terms of my own private sector involvement, because I work at senior levels at Oxford, at Ocean Cold Storage, and at Eskimo Foods, as it was then. And all of those things, as it were, the formal exposure and education helped me to better understand financial discipline, the budgeting process, because we had to do them in the private sector also, and how we get things done in a way that preserve the health of the entity. In the case of the public sector, the government is a critical entity, and the government fiscal house must always be in order so that it can lead by example.
Okay, so we have heard the term surplus. I remember you mentioning surplus after surplus after surplus. But what does a government surplus really mean for the ordinary citizen? And compare and contrast that to a deficit.
Thanks. That's a very good question, because again it goes to the critical principles you engage with in your opening question about fiscal discipline. Discipline is so critical to all that we are going to achieve and do. And understanding again the numbers, how they are computed, how will they be derived, helps us in understanding how we are going to respond to them. In a simple way, the deficit means no money there. Put it in colloquial terms, that you have overspent. When you look at your income, in some cases, some people only source of income is their weekly or monthly paycheck. Mm-hmm. Well, if you're working for $5,000, you're getting $3,000 by and large after all the deductions and so on and so on. And when you begin to look at your bills, I can't pay courts, I can't pay for my child preschool, I can't do this, I can't do that, I don't only have money to top up my phone, you know you are in a deficit. Because your flows coming in are greater than those that you have to put out, that is expenditure. Mm-hmm. And it means at some point, some situation adverse will develop. A good example, I have a credit card, nice. It gives me additional capacity to get things because I could get them on credit. That is what it is. But if I can't pay it, there's a problem. Mm-hmm. I go on, I try to buy ice cream or buy a lunch, and my card decline. And I say, wait there, what is this? Try it again. The person tries it again. No money there. Your card has been declined. Those are typical instances of a person operating in a deficit. And a deficit really, if left unchecked, because there will be moments in the life of the individual and in the life of the country where from time to time we will have to spend more than when we we got in at that particular moment in time. So there's a time frame when we have to do certain things. It may be an emergency at home, so you have to go and do more. It may be hurricane coming. You go on and you stack up all kind of things, preparing for the worst. You end up in a deficit, which you have to pay. And the question and the challenge is, would you be able to reconcile? Would you be able to pay? And still, as it were, maintain a dignified existence. And that is where the challenge comes for the government. When we, for example, hear, and I wanted to say it from the horse's mouth in a manner of speaking, that in the last couple of years, how terrible our country has been run. And some might have heard that from presenters you had before. You look, for example, at the level of deficit in the country, and we have some very significant figures, starting at 200 plus in deficit, and going over year after year for $300 million in over expenditure. And therefore, we could say safely that over the last 3 years, this one counting, the government going to be near $1 billion. $1 billion in deficit spending. When in 2011 we find ourselves in the clutches of the IMF, we were not that close. So imagine now, and that was over, say, the 20-year, well, it wasn't 20 then, from 95 to 2011. We are talking about 16, 17 years of the Douglas administration. We had reached that point where in order to finance these over expenditure, we had to go to borrow from the IMF $224 million equivalent in order to keep the hospital opening, in order to be able to pay our teachers. In other words, no money was there. We were in this position of consistent overdraft that the government could not finance its normal operations. And the penalty then for the deficit is that we had to live through what they call an austerity measure program, an IMF austerity program. And that was the harsh medicine imposed to, as it were, bring the country back in alignment.
And what does the austerity measure, what does that mean? That
means daily hard times. You now have to, all these things that you're doing in an excessive and bad way, it is an effort now to cut out waste, to cut back on the corrupt practices where they are, to cut back on the double dipping and all the overpricing and all of these things that leads government to go beyond what has been budgeted and what is normal. And it means hardship. In our case, a lot of people were sent out. A lot of persons, they were not even given an option. They were told as soon as you reach 55, you're going to have to go. We cannot afford to continue. A lot of programs were cut back. We can't continue with that. And then you had the taxes. VAT was introduced for the first time at 17%. And in that year when VAT was reduced, it was the highest rate of VAT applicable in the region. So great then was the gap between what the government was getting from its normal operation and what it was spending, that the IMF came in, as it were, with the matcher to cut back on a lot of things, because ultimately you need some form of equality and you needed adjustment. Yes, they gave you the $225 million, $250 million, they needed to get back that too. And so they put certain tricks in place which largely hurt the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. So whenever you hear the government is in deficit, it is a bad thing for you, because ultimately somebody has to pay for it. How does the government get money? From taxes largely, from providing services for a fee. So that would mean, for example, you might find you go to the hospital and certain things which hitherto were available, they tell you have to pay for that. You have to pay for your x-ray. You have to pay for this. You have to pay for that. They are adding then to the stream of fees in order to bring the revenue up to come with your collections. It means that when a young man does some work for the Ministry of Health and he charges as little as $300, he's getting a lot of run round. His services has already been used, but the Ministry of Health for months could not pay the young man $300. And then when he goes, I say, oh, what about your business license? Well, why you didn't ask for that before you took the service, if that was a requirement? And these are all some of the delaying tactics. We hear of people now whose pension time they send them on leave, so they know that these payments are going to come up, and people at home waiting for months can't get their pensionable entitlements from the government. Why? They're trying to work magic with the monies, having, as it were, destroy the economy and mismanage the economy. And so the IMF comes in and it said, well, cut back on these things. Too many things are free. A lot of these things which are quote-unquote free are for regular people, people who are vulnerable, and they say you have to pay for this. We see it now being shown in the way the government does things. Before, a person used to get 2 and 3 uniforms. The government cut back that. Cut back these things that were important to people. So it means you as the parent now has to pay more for the education of your children. They begin to introduce means tests, and they are not necessarily bad, but they also misapplied in that there is no consistency. So you might be excluded, but Jane in the same position as you, she is given the opportunity to proceed in that program. And the only difference may be they enter the criterion of party politics in the administration. And these lead to the unfairness, the hurt, etc., that we are seeing in the society at this time. It means that the transfers that we would normally make to help Skelec at a time when the fuel cost was going high so that it can be kept at a certain level, the government says, Skelec, you have to collect from those people. So you in Old Road now, they're telling you we used to give you a couple months, you have to pay us this month. They're telling you to come bring thousands of dollars by tomorrow if you want your light. Well, if you couldn't pay month by month, where will you get that lump sum all at once? And so we see policies being executed without compassion, without a sense of the lived reality of persons. And while people should pay for services, they must be affordable. And that is the job of the government, because fundamentally the government exists for one purpose: do those things for the people of the country which they cannot individually do for themselves. I can't build a school and finance it. The government must do that for me. I can't pave the road going up to where I live for everybody to come, turn around, and I carry the burden. The government must do those things. They are in the nature of public services. I can't pay to have a personal doctor. Well, years ago, Battery ensured that he built health centers, put them where they were accessible, had a doctor go in on specific days to serve his particular community because he understood. Unlike the new generation of people, fake laborites, that these services were critical to the survival of the country, to the peace and productivity of individual. And we come now to appreciate that the health of the nation is the wealth of the nation, because people who are sick and ill cannot be at their most productive level. And the productivity in the country is what helps to move the country to a higher heights. So surpluses are good. They signal responsible fiscal management. The signal to the external people looking on that you may be a good person to extend credit to, because when they look, you have some wherewithal. But more than that, it is a way to consecrate the future. Consecrate the future, because we have come to find out when difficult things happen to us, all we have are ourselves. We have to look to ourselves first. I need some money, I have to go to doctor. Where I'm going to look, you have to be able to have something, save somewhere, some friend, some loved one to be able to help you. Because going through the banking process and the credit union, taking up time, but you have an emergency. And therefore, it is the surpluses that in the end help the government to do more, provide the buffer, and provide the additional resource that save the government from going into debt. Because when there is a deficit, how is it financed? It is financed either by borrowing or drawing down on the savings that you have. Same way in our lives. When we can't manage on our salary, we go to our account and we take off something. And we know month by month that is getting less. And we become a little more scared. Because we've said, look, all these savings I had. And as soon as this government come in, I can't see my way. Look what I have, nothing. And so the surplus debt is a critical indicator, especially when it is consistently happening. Because if it's just once in a blue moon, you're back in the same habit, it is bad, because it will catch up with you at some point in time. And again, in terms of the actual work in the life of the country, we see when there is no surplus, all the hardships. It takes so long to fix a community center in Keyon or the school. And you hear of all these projects that are soon to come, and they never come, and they will not be finished before the election cycle. They will remain uncompleted. And it is sad, because so many hopes were built on these things. And so that is why now you need, again, when you're having this disconnect between your revenue inflows and your expenditure, you have to do a serious consideration of where the weaknesses are. Your systems in control. Are people double billing? Are people playing games with the treasury? Is a lady in St. Peter's getting $30,000 per month, ostensibly, to provide food for people in the community? And the people are up there can't see the number of people or the quality of food. How is those things slipping through in our system? Is there something not right when we hear every minute there's a ceremony down at the spot for the smart hospital? And so you are paying the bulldozer and the front-end loader and all of those for what now tantamounts to a gimmick to scam the money out of the treasury, and in the hope of somebody who is getting all of these repeated jobs to do the same work would give you back something. And these then are taxing the economy, burdening the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, because money is being spent, but you can't see. You can't see how with all the money the government is raking in each year. The government in the last 3 years would have overspent, by the end of this year, nearly $1 billion. And the IMF report for May 7, 2026 speak to these in terms of the overall balance, negative 11% in 2024, negative 11.7%, negative 8.7%, and for 2027, looking ahead, negative 7.5%. And you get the figure really, which they could make it more easy, but multiply these against the respective GDP. And because that is how they are measuring in their report. And you see, we are talking about $300+ million. And you ask, How could they be spending all these extra money and there's nothing to show for it? No high school, no 2,400 homes, no MRI at the hospital, which was to come after 2 weeks, and up to the last budget we were promised in the first quarter. We are now going into the third quarter and still no MRI and still no improvement in delivery. What Curtis Martin said publicly in his press statement in justifying the change in the shift system, that there were a lot of unavoidable deaths, remain a particular challenge for the delivery of health care. In other words, people are dying who need not have died, and all of us would have heard stories about it. It affects people at low-income levels. It affects persons at the higher end income bracket. And why is the government going to wait until somebody sues it for the loss of life? Somebody will be brave enough and perhaps resourceful enough to take that matter to court and make the government compensate them for the loss of the life of their loved one. I have a constituent went to the hospital. He was sent home. Go just take a cup of tea. Within 3 hours he reached back to the hospital. The young man had a second stroke. Today the man is walking around with clear disability which were avoidable. So I understand when Curtis Martin told the truth when he said there were too much cases of misdiagnosis. People are not getting the proper care, and it is a serious question of alarm at this particular moment in time in our country. This is not where we should be. And a lot of shortcuts are being taken because the government is fighting to pay its bills. But certain things they are not cutting back. They're traveling to every meeting. I heard the Prime Minister was lamenting that some heads don't come to every meeting. And the heads must always exercise that discretion, because although it may be a meeting of the heads, the agenda may be such that domestic priorities take precedence. But every invitation they have to accept. And sometimes you have an ambassador who could have done more. When the Prime Minister goes off to Brussels to speak to an ambassador, at a time when Ireland had suspended our visa-free access, he should have gone to Dublin to speak with his equal. The ambassador in Ireland is not accredited to St. Kitts. It's like having a conversation in Port of Spain with the U.S. ambassador for Trinidad. They would listen to you politely, etc., but they would say to you, have a word with my colleague in Barbados. How does a prime minister go around the world when disaster is imminent and goes down to the very lowest level of the pecking order in terms of state relations? It begs for analysis whether we are just marking time or really serious about governance and government, and more importantly, the people within our jurisdiction. These are real issues. And you see, this extravagant traveling, taking up a jet plane, paying for the cost of it to go and come, in the context of the live reality that we are having, a hospital where care is neither affordable nor available. You go in the emergency, you're waiting for 6-7 hours. Until these things are dealt with, until we go to the heart of these things, we are like top in mud in terms of the management of our resources. We need to see results. We need to see value for money. When he comes back, and he comes back empty-handed, and he gone with the hefty per diem, he stayed in the most luxurious of hotels. Conveniences are important. We don't begrudge him that. But you also have to moderate what you're doing in the context of the lived reality of your country. I heard Prime Minister Mia Mottley in Barbados. She was put under pressure by the opposition then for excessive traveling. She went and she gave the scorecard. All these are what I got as a result of my engagement. She said, I've never flown first class. I was surprised. Mark, you sometime people will do the courtesy of upgrading you because of who you are. So it comes complimentary. She said, I don't do that. I have never stayed in these so-called luxury hotel. That was somebody conscious of where her country and citizens were, and said the way in which I operate must give some reflection that I understand that reality. In contrast, I've heard our Prime Minister say that he deserved to fly in luxury. He must get on a first class. He has said to people, he will not travel in economy. He has said that. How those things now thrive with your conscience so that you could sleep at night when thousands of people daily are put in embarrassment because the government is saying, I can't give Skellig no more subsidy, so you all have to pay. And Skellig is saying, bring thousands of dollars today or tomorrow. Up to yesterday I knew someone in the Prime Minister's constituency who called. I'm not calling your name, mark you. And it was that they had a bill and they were demanding 50%, which works out to thousands of dollars. Well, if I can't pay monthly X amount, how am I going to get that? These are the challenges that come when we mismanage the resources of the country, when our budget is not in a line, and we are not showing the right sensitivity or sensibility in relation to the consequences of these things. I am proud that in contrast, we did what we could to balance the books, to procure surpluses. We left behind for the good of the country over just about $700 million. I think it was an economist in Peter Adrian who basically said, that has been, as it were, my grandma would say, they whack it off, they waste it. Now gone down, now they're probably in 100 million and so on. So they are hoping to use the savings accumulated, which was there to help us through unpredictable hard times like COVID-19.
I was just about to speak about COVID-19.
That is what the surpluses do.
But how did you manage to maintain a surplus during a difficult period like COVID-19?
Well, in 2021, I think it was, according to the IMF report, we managed a surplus. Yes, it was about 50-something million dollars. 2021, yes, that we had 5.5% overall balance of a GDP of some $2.27 billion. That translates roughly around that figure I just called. And we were able to do that again because we understood the budget system. And my job as the Minister of Finance was to ensure as much as possible we kept expenditure under control. We kept people to ensure that when they are coming to the Budget Estimates Committee, they have realistic figures. So if you're bringing a capital project, has it gone through Public Works? Do you have a realistic costing of this project? You can't just come and say, well, I need this done, I need a school. School needs to be planned. You have to get designers. You have to get it submitted to the building board. Ensure that it meets the requirements spatially and otherwise before we would put money to finance something that is not yet properly crystallized. So you get people to think about what it is we really need, how we will do it, what it will cost the country. It can't be somebody just have a dream and they say, I'm going to walk up by Batcher's house and I'm going to start renovating Batcher's property and I will have it as a museum. Well, that person didn't even know that Batcher property has been willed to his heirs and successors and they are named, and that you needed permission. And so you go and you spend all these sums of money. Not one of these things were in the budget for the particular year. So you're carrying on with some of the regular programs and you add more to it. You're setting the budget then off track. And that is where we go back to again where we start with. You need the fiscal discipline to stick with it. And because we stick with it, we were able to do so much. We were able to do roads. We were able to do a brand new Mary Child's Hospital. We were able to do, all those are in the first term. We were able to do an oncology wing. We were able to reduce the cost of the hemodialysis treatment at the JNF. You know, all these things. We were able to outfit the psychiatric ward. All these things we were doing while bringing this people-centered program. We were able to put tens of millions of dollars in the development bank to finance home mortgage for our civil servants and other government employees. We were able to introduce a PAP program, providing an extra $500 a month for those who are among the most vulnerable in the society. Did everyone who got or had to have gotten? No, there would be leakage in any system, but it was a manageable level. And so we were able, as it were, 2018, we started it. We continued in 2019. We continued in 2020, even when we had good reason to halt it. Because COVID came in March of 2020, you may have recalled, and the country was shut down, which meant little or no economic activity was taking place. So we could have said, well, we're not going to really deal with this, but we had to deal with the reality that in these hard, pressuring times where people were shut in and locked in, it was the time for supportive programs to be continued, not be curtailed at the worst time in people's life. And in fact, during COVID, because more persons became jobless, we increased the number. During COVID, the PAP program reached perhaps over 6,000 beneficiaries. Imagine Marriott closed down with hundreds out of work. Jack Tar closed down all these hotels. And we had to ensure they had at least something to take them through. Those persons who were depending on a second job, there were no second job because they were curfew. Regrettably so. But it was necessary because it was the policy measure taken all over the world to protect people from an unknown development called COVID-19. Up to now, people are still arguing where it originated and why and so on. But we put a life-first strategy, and we therefore are committed to feed people and ensure they had the basic necessities, including families with children or persons, because it was not only children, they were not only children, but they were adults with disabilities. We gave them stipend. We gave the bus drivers stipend. And so that COVID pattern went on in 2011. With 2011, we had begun a phase opening up and recommendation from the CMO and Dr. Wilkerson. Those were the two in the leadership, and of course the PS Loris Harris. All of them came and they made the presentation, and Cabinet accepted, and we began the phase opening up of the country. That brought in resources. well, we became more discerning in terms of the projects. And in the end, we were able to come up with a surplus. So we begin again to stock up our resources. We spent over $300 million reorganizing the country for it to be able to withstand the horrors of the COVID-19 pandemic, which no country was able to withstand. United Kingdom was locked down. US, some people say that was why Biden won, because Biden stay in a shelter, in a safe place, etc. All over the world. So what we were doing was not unique. The only difference between countries was have to do with the extent of the period in which they had these important and necessary measures in place. And one of the consideration was doing it was whether the economy had enough resources. The resources they're talking about, you have money in the treasury. I heard one prime minister said, well, if I open up, COVID may kill them. And if I close down, they will die too. So I'm going to have to open up earlier. In other words, he was prepared to accept a higher risk. We were saying we wanted to minimize the risk to our people and to keep them safe.
But Dr. Harris, I don't know if you remember or if you heard the criticisms about you not opening the country as early as people thought you should have. What would you say to those people?
I would say that there will always be, on matters like that, different perspectives. And in hindsight, one may look and say, perhaps we could have gone a month, 2 months earlier. But look at the principle. Save life first. We relied heavily on the professionalism and the integrity of those most knowledgeable about the particular disease and the fatalities that could occur as a consequence of ignoring it, to give us advice. We brought in the police every week. There was a meeting. It wasn't something we just pull out our hand, We had the commissioner of police, Mr. Brandy. We had the commissioner at the prison, James. We had the commander of the defense force. We had, Dr. Laws. We had Dr. Wilkerson. We had the people from Nevis, and we came to a consensus. What was good? What would have been, in the end, be most beneficial to the country? And we took a decision that we will go with the phased way. It was the one that exposed us to the least risk. And yes, we would have hoped that the knowledge and the science was so sufficiently advanced that we could have gotten guidance. But we also were relying on the regional bodies, that were part of the decision making. So I will not argue if people said, they wanted it earlier. People are entitled to that particular preference. I had a greater view, a greater burden of decision making, to look at the country as a whole, to look at not only those who would be responsible, wearing their masks and do all the necessary things, but look at those who are not in that particular position. But perhaps in hindsight, that was an area that could have been reviewed. But we took the best advice. I want to make it clear that came to us from all the technical people that were involved. And we brought our own governance responsibilities to the fore. And we said, let us go in a certain way so that we minimize exposure and risk from having another flare-up, a second and third time that would set us back more deeply than before. And so I'm not going to get in an argument about the time. I would say the time was one presented to us, and none of the professionals. We had persons coming there from Ross University, making presentation, whether on their own or from their own professional judgment, to be part of the discussion. We had, in reality, in terms of the decision making, an all of society approach. We were engaged in the chamber, we were engaged in the church, we were engaged in as many people as would avail themselves in the decision making affecting the country at that particular juncture. And there was consensus in terms of the approach, maybe in the execution of the phase out. Certain things could have been expedited, and certain things were, certain factories, I remember one in Sandy Point, I think it's Electrofab, they came to us and they said, but we have these particular things, could you do a facilitation? We let the technical people go, look at the spatial requirements in the facility, made recommendations, and then we facilitated them. We had calls from the Situation Room in Washington, D.C. The government there was saying to us, some of these things that are being built in St. Kitts are critically needed if we are to expedite the support for the same COVID-19 pandemic. And again, did the due diligence, and we made the exception in particular moments where there was a consensus. This was the right approach. And I say, in hindsight, everybody will think they knew what was best. We had to have a systematic approach, or else today will be on, tomorrow will be off. And the systematic approach came by assembling a technical team, drawn from the island of Nevis and St. Kitts, because it's one federation, making input in the decision making. They had regular forums up at NEMA, at where all the stakeholders were gathered. It doesn't mean that everyone agreed, but it meant that a majority of them were in favor of the particular position. And some groups, as it is, when these things do occur, would have been affected more than some. And that is why we broadened the support that we were providing to a broader cross-section of people in terms of the PAP, in terms of stipend, than we would have done before COVID-19.
Okay, Dr. Harris, we only have a few minutes left, and I do want to touch on some critical issues. Now, before we get into, the CBI, because that's something that's always a big deal, what steps would you take? What first steps would you take to restore fiscal discipline and to rebuild economic confidence?
That's a good question. And the first step is to get to the heart of the numbers. We have to have a systematic review of them by external persons, along with those who are within. So the first step would be to engage the financial secretary and those who are in the high command of the financial management of the country, to hear their views and their concerns, and to have them point out to you, why are we overboard so often and in such a large degree? $300 million each year in deficit spending. That is amazing. It is unexpected in normal times. There is no COVID. So you can't even use the explanation, well, we had to do a lot of things. We had to double up on security payments, double up on this, double up on that. And nothing was coming in. Can't be that explanation. So we have to get a clearer understanding of the root cause. We have to then begin to rectify them, correct them. We have to let the budgetary system work as it was intended to help us weed out waste. We have to set the new perspective about this old concept of value for money, that whatever we are spending, we must be able to in some way crystallize what is the benefit of doing this. If we are building a health center, why? Is there a real need? And these kinds of conversations will have to take place within. And I would also want to have the benefit of other experts, because sometimes people coming in raise question about what is happening, and by getting explanation for them, you are wiser. And then we have to basically begin to plug the loopholes. There must be a big loophole. And one financial wizard used to tell me very often, whenever you're in a financial hole, stop digging. So that means if you keep digging the hole and you're in, you're going to die in that hole. You're not going to be able to come out. And that happens when you have to go into the IMF program. You are saying to the world that I am unable to come up with the fiscal prescriptions which will enable me to get out of the hole. But to get out of the hole, you first have to stop the digging. So we have to stop the waste, the corrupt practices, the scam and the government treasury. Stop those. The bulking up of unnecessary persons for political advantage. The misuse of all of government resources, vehicles, offices to do their party political work. All these things add to a cost. We know there are people having functions and the state is paying for it. The state is paying for it. These things are wrong, they are corrupt, they are unacceptable. And there are people in the government system who know about these things. They will be prepared to come and to share these information. So we are stopping it after it has happened because we have to restore fiscal discipline. I think these are some of the things. And then we have to look more carefully at the economy. Our traditional sectors, agriculture, tourism, the CBI program and all of those things. How can we ensure these particular drivers can serve the national agenda and the priority as we lay out a plan for a new direction, a revival of our economy? Because once the economy is growing and strong, and the fiscal affairs are being appropriately and properly managed, people will be happy. The government will be able to do more. Look at all the things we were able to do. They couldn't do them. They couldn't carry a PAP program. They promised $1,500. They came in, they cut it to $250 against a promise. But we carried it. We sustained it even in the most dreaded of times, COVID-19, and expanded its reach to give support to ordinary people. Look at our housing program. We were providing support to NHC to assist with the financing and other arrangements. We were able to do all of these things because we manage differently and we manage properly. So with the experience which we have, with the information we are getting, and I want to thank all those civil servants who are providing us with important information, continue to do so. We will protect you. You will never hear me call your name here or anywhere else for that matter. So continue, and if you can't reach me, tell a friend to tell me. We will work on it for you. So there are people in there who are so outraged now at the low level of squalor in which the current administration has taken our finances, our country, our way of life. Behind all the numbers is the reality of how people are living, pauperized. I don't got the money to get my child on a bus today, Dr. Harris. Lord, they come cut me off yesterday, and I don't know how I'm going to do it. They put me in shame. When so many people, they are not isolated cases. In other words, that become the normal pattern. And when you see thousands of your citizens are at the level of poverty, better word, indigence, you know, some sort of reckoning has to be done. And you can't go by your own I wouldn't want to say foolishness, but your own limited understanding of people reality. Imagine everybody is bawling out, and the government say, no, hush. What you all say? Things good. Good for them, yes. Good for them, yes. But not good for the people they should be serving. And we will bring back a government that will serve, that is committed to a better standard of living for all the people in St. Kitts and Nevis. And we will bring a pool of persons, because the expertise, the government can't be so narrow as to think that it's only them and their so-called expert know about the country and should know. You have to open up with the chamber, with the manufacturing association, with the church, and let all of them, because they know something, all of them put in something into the decision-making process, and then you accept the responsibility for what you will want to implement from all of these recommendations. Sometimes the recommendations are not bad, it's just the timing. When do we do it? Just as we had that discussion during COVID, how long?
Yes.
When do you do it? And that becomes a point of quarrel, and we accept that there were different approaches. But given what was put forward to us and given the consensus, we ran a consultative and a consensus government, and that was the outcome. But what people must also bear in mind, we saved lives, we had the best record in terms of that. But we didn't leave the people alone, we stood by them. We gave tremendous support to the farmers and fishers. Right now, farmers in particular, they can't get their products sold. Whether it is pineapple or this or that, the government is not there with them. There are other farmers. You go up to the Department of Agriculture and you wonder why they don't close down. Because it's like nothing there. Because the government can't find the money.
Dr. Harris, let's speak a little bit about the Citizenship by Investment program. Now, you mentioned the program as an economic driver. Mm-hmm. I don't know, with the reports that we're getting this week out of Antigua and international reports as well about the EU's decision to phase out these programs by 2028, how viable of an economic driver do you think this program will continue to be? Mm-hmm. That's one. Mm-hmm. And then two, I want you to speak to us a little bit about how you manage the CBI program, how the money was used, because there is the perception that a lot of money came into the Federation, but people did not really feel the impact on the ground. I know it's a lot, but can you speak to that, please?
Well, I tend to, a lot is happening in relation to our CBI, and the government is too secretive and dishonest about these events. And the government is therefore limited in its knowledge, in its experience, and its agility in responding to the problems which these face. Take, for example, and we pass across it when we mention the Prime Minister's visit to Brussels. Why go to Brussels to speak to an ambassador when Ireland, a significant and successfully managed country in Europe, has basically said, well, I'm going to deny all of your citizens, not just holders of ordinary passport, but those even of official and diplomatic standing, access, visa-free access into our country. And even for purposes of in-transit, they will have to get their visa from us. That's a big development. When in 2025, Turkey did that, Turkey restricted it to the ordinary passports, holders of those passports, which of course is about 97% of all passport holders, maybe even 99%, majority of people. That's what they will have. when Turkey did that in 2025 and the UK instituted a change in terms of the ETAs and all of these things that were now required, it was a wake-up call for a sensible government to get up and to go have face-to-face dialogue with people who can make the decision. In other words, senior people. Go face-to-face with them. Not wait and an ambassador to pass a message. He go to some official in another ministry and he doesn't reach up. You have to go face-to-face to demonstrate the urgency and the importance of the matter and begin to do not just one country, but as many of those countries that matter. Because truth be told, one of the most attractive feature for persons holding our passport is the mobility and the ease of mobility to enter certain countries. We all know that less than 0.005% of them ever come to St. Kitts. So the passport is not really an investment to allow them to come here. In fact, we are open up to most of the world anyway, so they didn't need it. It was to give them the access to Canada, to the USA, and to EU, where they can explore opportunities, whether for residents, whether for their children to get certain benefits, whether as a preventive measure in case in their particular societies you have civil unrest, they can move out. That's what the pull is. And when you understand that, and you see leading group of countries in the European Union begin to signal, this is what they're doing. Because if the UK does this, France, Germany are taking notice. They're going to be asking why you change your policy. We perceive greater risks. They are therefore going to up their ante in relation to concern about your program. The government then lost a golden opportunity to defend the national interest. I wish they were as proactive, because in 2025, did the government issue a release in the country to tell us that Turkey was no longer going to accept us, that it had withdrawn the visa-free? Secrecy in the government when the national interest is at stake. The government has not worked for the people. You can't do this thing behind bars. I knew about the Turkey prohibition or exclusion of it when citizens called me. One citizen who shall be nameless wanted to go to Turkey for specific health care. When they got to London, they couldn't board the flight to go to Turkey. Why? You no longer have visa-free access. That then create uncertainty, additional expenditure, which were avoidable. But the government is having this, well, I gather the Prime Minister said recently, certain things behind closed doors. When the national interest is at stake, because the CDI program had at one point constitute about, 95% of the non-tax revenue. It is the largest item in your non-tax revenue, and it is greater than all the other taxes you're getting. It was then the largest single contributor to the government satisfying the budget requirements. So when you are in that conundrum, you have to treat it in an aggressive way. You have to be monitoring these capitals. And they were warned. They were warned by the action of these three countries. Nothing in the national community. Only a belated response. But there is also a publication. I have a copy of it here coming out of the EU Commission. Commission staff working document accompanying the report from the Commission to the European Parliament and the Council, the 8th report under the visa suspension mechanism. An important document. and this was released way in December. They had enough time then to plan. And in a particular section, Eastern Caribbean countries, they highlight the risks. They tell us in this report some information that has never been made available by the secretive government here. So they preferred to send diplomatic notes giving information about something vital to us and not even a word from it. So they tell us here, Antigua and Barbuda, how many applications, Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and they tell us the number they rejected and, as it were, how many they process in 2024. They tell us in St. Kitts and Nevis, the volume of applications went from 1,987 in 2023 to 200 in 2023 in 2024. A massive reduction, which told us something was wrong. This is when you could read numbers. And you ain't have to be no accountant and financial wizard. You say something dropped from nearly 2,000 down at 200. That's a calamity.
Dr. Harris,
and this is part of the pain now. The government, in my view, have been neglectful and negligent in pursuing this matter. This is the 7th or the 8th report. There were other reports that posed the alarm. How is it Gaston has come out to say we have been monitoring it? Gaston has said in his release, we knew, and we have basically set up a team to engage them, and that we are committed still to this program, according to Gaston Brown, because it will be impossible to fill the void. And they are trying to buffer certain positions that they could articulate to the EU for them perhaps to change their mind, extend the period, whatever the outcome. I wish them well, because the fortunes of all these OECS countries rely upon a successful renegotiation in relation to these. But time is not with us. And a government faced with that crisis cannot rely on their wisdom, because they are lacking of it in it, based on their performance over the years. Almost every time they touched the CBI program, they did something wrong. They came in, they say, Harris had the price too low, 200,000 US. We carried up to 400,000. And then within months, they changed it back down. Because they didn't take time to understand the market, to speak with persons independently before pursuing a negative agenda. They took time to make politics out of it. But when it comes to something so crucial, the reputation of the country becomes an important selling point. If this is a country where the government itself is saying is weak in corruption, and they will know because they are corrupt, then who will want to come and invest with you? If the rules are changing ever so fast, which tells me you can't bring an SRO this month and by next month you're changing it, what has happened? It meant that you didn't take into consideration essential things that ought to have been considered. So that is a challenge, and that is something that has to be worked on with the kind of, aggression is not the word, but with the kind of passion that Gaston Brown has brought forward in this matter. The leveling with the country becomes important, but critically important is to put a team of people who understands what is at stake and understands the nature of the program to be able to articulate sensibly and persuasively to persons whose minds are already made up. Very quickly, we faced that in 2015 when our CBI was sanctioned by the financial crime entity within the U.S. Treasury. It was a major blow. We faced that in November 2014 when Canada withdrew the visa-free access. And we spent, well, it was an ongoing effort because we never cease upgrading, reforming, bringing in professional people, recommending 2 or T22 recommendations that were put forward. And what we were able to do was to prevent any worsening of the situation and build the foundation for the restoration at a later date of this program. Because we were told very early, when countries take those drastic steps, they do not immediately reverse them, because it would be a reflection that they were not as thorough as they ought to before going to that next level.
Dr. Harris, we are out of time, but I want to thank you for joining us this morning. And I know that this topic, we can speak an entire hour about the Citizenship by Investment Program, but let's hope that further down the line we can address it. Do you have any quick final words for our listeners this morning?
Yes, I have. Want to say thanks to all those who have listened and will share what they understand from this program with others. I say thank you in advance. And I make the commitment that the People's Labour Party in government will serve the good people of St. Kitts and Nevis well. You have seen from 7 years of plenty and astute management of the economy and the wider society, the potential of a PLP in leadership. We embrace everyone across the political divide, and although we come under the banner of PLP with its large tent, we will draw the resources needed for the effective management of the country from across all political stripes. So thank you very much for your confidence. I will serve humbly, intelligently, and to the best of my God-given abilities. Thank you very much for hosting us and for asking these very pertinent questions of national interest.
For the People's Choice.
We are going to end the People's Choice this afternoon. It's afternoon already. Thank you so much for joining us right here on Freedom FM.
For the people, by the people. It's time to talk. It's time to listen. It's time for the People's Choice.